In today's tutorial, we're going to use a custom set of brushes for Adobe Photoshop to bring the light to art. Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. I'm David Bird with Reimagined. I'm an award-winning photographer and Photoshop artist that specializes in fantasy composite art. And we can now finally get to the tutorial to show you how to use my custom set of brushes that I've created for Adobe Photoshop in conjunction with Oniric by Composite Nation to be able to make this piece of gelled glamour artwork. This has been teased in previous videos on the channel for a few weeks, but unfortunately I was not able to make this video in a timely manner because of events surrounding COVID-19, as well as the event of the very tragic death of George Floyd. We've seen some brilliant, beautiful moments of human activism in the past couple of weeks. I have some thoughts to share about that, but that will be at the end of this video to pay respect to folks who are here just for the tutorial itself. If you want to pick up my custom brushes, go to my website, reimagined.com. There is a link in the description below. Currently on the site, there are 2 brush packs, but spoilers, there are more on the way. There are 3 icons. The first brush pack is Glow Auras, and that's for backgrounds. There's Light Flares, that's the sparklies and lighties and all those pretty things. And then the third icon is a combo pack of all of the brushes combined. It's a little bit cheaper if you buy that instead of buying the brush packs separately. Second, I highly recommend that you go to compositenation.com. It's the home for Oniric. Oniric is a very powerful plugin for Photoshop that creates beautiful, non-destructive light flares and glows within the scene. It does not need my brushes at all to be able to do it. And nor do you need Oniric to be able to use my brushes to create light flares and glows, but I do recommend that you use them together because Oniric is truly remarkable. I love using it in my artwork. I am not an affiliate. I don't get paid to say it. I push the program to people because it has changed my artwork forever. I absolutely love using it. So go to my website to pick up the brushes. Go to compositenation.com to learn more about Oniric. And before we hit the Photoshop, if you are new to this channel, then thank you for stopping by. If you like the content you find in the tutorial today, then please give the video a like and consider subscribing to the channel. New content comes out each week in photography and Photoshop education, and when you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell icon so you'll be notified of that new content when you return to the YouTubes. And now the speeches are done. Let's hit the Photoshop and create some light. Go towards the light, Carolyn. Go toward this house has been clean. To get started, let's make an introduction. This is Savannah, and you can see more of her amazing work by visiting the Instagram account at the link below. As you can see, I've already created the artistic work using my custom brushes and Oniric in conjunction to be able to build this very stylized look. What I want to do is explain the layer stack, we'll talk about the photography, and then we'll go through the process of actually recreating this scene. So first and foremost, at the top of the layer stack, these 2 layers named Oniric Element Glow and then Glow 1. This is what Oniric has produced based upon the layers that I created with the brush strokes themselves. So ultimately, if you're new to Oniric, this is the output that it will create. I'm going to delete these because we're going to start recreating this from scratch. So let's talk about the photography by looking at the base image itself. So this was a 3 light setup. There are 2 lights on either side of the model with magenta gel material over the bulbs. There is a 3rd light that is boomed above her with a blue gel material over the bulb. She's photographed against 50% gray seamless paper. And when you use gray paper, the colors of the lights, as it passes over it, it will take on that color property. This is one of the reasons why I love to use 50% gray paper or any type of gray paper when I do gelled glamour work or any kind of gelled photography work itself. So once I got the image into Photoshop, I went through a retouch using frequency separation, dodging and burning, and so forth. If those retouching techniques are new to you or you need a refresher, look at the card above. That will take you to the retouching series on this channel. That is a deep dive, starting with Adobe Camera Raw all the way through, showing you how to make actions for frequency separation, dodging and burning, and so forth. There's even a video that gives you my retouching action that I use in all of my artwork. Just go to the series and you'll find it on the channel itself. So once the retouch was complete, I went through the process of extracting her to make her her own layer, which is this layer here. And the reason why I did this was 2 main reasons. First, I wanted to add a texture to the paper. So we have this texture layer here that gives the paper a little bit of texture and also has a built-in vignette where the outer perimeter is a little bit darker and then it gets brighter in the center. The second texture is this particle pattern. And I wanted to add this to the scene because the overall style of this is a lot of light and glow and so forth. And I wanted there to be that sparkly confetti star field feeling in the background and build it all the way up instead of it being a neutral background where it looked like she was just glowing all over the scene. Is it absolutely necessary? No, but it was just a choice I made as an artist to be able to build up this stylized look for this piece itself. So we're going to do Oniric in 3 different stages. The first one that I always recommend before you use my brushes or you do anything else with your work is to do one pass to the image using just the model itself. Oniric is looking for the luminosity information within the image, and that's going to come into play as we start using the brushes, but I'm simply going to come to the topmost layer, and this is what Photoshop sees for light as what we can see right now. So when I click generate on Oniric, it's going to take us into the interface, and we'll start working with it to create a general pass of glow onto the model herself. If you're new to Oniric, it does take some time to be able to initiate everything, and then ultimately, once we're done with this stage of it that we can see on the screen right now, when we begin to save it and output the actual effect, it can take a little bit more time. It is doing so much under the hood to be able to create this stylized look. I just wanted to say that it is not a reflection of the program. It is ultimately just doing quite a bit, so bear with it and give it some patience. So there are 2 different effects of Oniric. There's diffuse, which is the glow, or we have streaks. We'll get to the streaks when we start using the light streak brushes, but for right now, we want to do our first pass. We want it to be on diffuse. So we need to see what Oniric sees, so I'm going to click X-ray. Anything in green is the luminosity information that Oniric is picking up based upon the current threshold you have set. So right now, it always defaults to 0.25. If you want Oniric to see more of the potential available light data within the scene, then increase the threshold itself. So I'm going to take it up to 0.5. When I do, it reruns it. So again, it can see more of her. Now, if I turn off X-ray, we can start to see the glow is taking place on her arms, a little bit on her face and so forth. It's a very soft, ethereal looking feeling. We can add some color to it. If we click Colorize, we can play with the other sliders and increase the radius of it so the glow will go outward. We can increase the exposure, and let's just do that just a little bit, and it's going to make those elements much brighter so the glow takes place just a little bit more. We can even increase the threshold and let it see just a little bit more of the potential light data within the scene itself. So right now I'm going to back that down to 0.5 or 0.49 because I think it's just getting a little too hot. By the way, just as a side note, there is a mask system, so we can start painting away, letting Oniric not see as much of that information in certain spots. Oniric has a lot of possibilities, a lot of controls. I highly recommend that you invest in the program and experiment with it. But for the purposes for today's video, I think this looks good enough, so I'm going to go ahead and click save. And now Oniric is actually going to create all of those effects that we just used the sliders in the interface to do. Depending upon the speed of your computer, that process can take just a little bit of time. Again, it's not a reflection of the program. It's doing a lot under the hood to be able to create it. Now, once it's done and we're back into Photoshop itself, we have our new layer here. This is the output of Oniric, and it's its own layer named Oniric Element Glow. I point this out because when Oniric goes into the dialog and starts working with the image, it's looking for available luminosity information within the picture to start building the effect. It ignores any of these layers that have been named Oniric Element Glow whatever, because this is an output layer of it. It's not going to look at all of this. And that's going to become important right now because we're going to start using the brushes themselves. So let's go through a best practice for the brushes as well as a best practice that I do on any stage of Oniric where I'm painting something into the scene and I need Oniric to only see what I'm painting and not everything else. So with this top layer of her, the layer where she's extracted selected, I'm going to make 2 new blank layers. The first blank layer that I created, I'm going to fill it with the color black. Now my foreground color right now is set to white, so I'm going to hit the letter X to switch it to black. And then while this new first blank layer is selected, I'm going to hold Alt or Option and hit the backspace key, and it will fill it with black. So right now, what we see is a black layer, a blank second layer here, and then the layer of Oniric. This is a lot of light data in the scene, but Oniric will not see this. So when we go into the dialogue, it's not going to try to build the effect on top of the layer of the effect that it just created, if that makes sense. So for purposes of video, I'm going to turn that layer off just for now. Now, This is the blank layer that we'll start painting the brush onto. So I'm going to turn off this black layer temporarily so we can see the scene. And then I'm going to hit B for brush and come up to the brush window here and scroll up. This is the combo pack of brushes. It starts with the background brushes and then it comes down to the light streak brushes. For the background brushes, there are two versions of the brush. There's the hard edge and soft edge. So it just depends on what you like to use. I prefer to use the hard edge for the background elements because I like that very defined perimeter, but I also created the soft edges for folks to have options. So I'm going to come down to the triangle brush here and click this one and then come back into the image. Now I'm going to rotate my brush's head by holding shift and hitting the right arrow key. By holding shift, it rotates the brush in larger even degree increments. Then I'm going to use the right bracket key to make my brush a little bit bigger into the scene. And now if I look at my foreground color, it's set to black because we just filled that one blank layer. I need to switch it back to white. So I'm going to hit the letter X to switch it to white. Why? Because again, Oniric looks for light data. If we paint with pure white, it will definitely see the entire brush stroke. It is possible to sample the existing colors in the scene and use those colors with these brushes to run them through Oniric. However, the color has to be the brightest version that you can get into the scene. Because if we sample right now, so I'm going to hold Alt or Option while I'm on my brush. And when you hold Alt or Option, it defers the brush to the eyedropper tool so we can sample existing color. If I were to sample this blue color at the top of her hair, my foreground color has been set to it. It's a nice light blue, but from a luminosity perspective, it's not as bright as a color over here in the top left corner of the color picker window. This is luminosity information. Oniric needs bright colors to work with. So I'm going to hit cancel and I'm going to hit D to reset my foreground and background colors to pure black and white and hit the letter X to make sure my foreground color is set to white. Now I'm going to position my brush roughly in the scene of where I want it to be. And I think that looks pretty even into the scene. I'm using my regular computer mouse and not my Wacom Intuos Pro pen because I don't want pressure sensitivity when I paint this into the scene. I'm also making sure that my opacity of my brush is set to 100% and the flow is set to 100%. So with that in mind, I'm going to put the brush where I want it and then click once, and now we have the stamp of the brush into the scene. So I'm going to come back to the brushes and we'll use this one. I believe is the one that was in the scene, the hard edge version. I'm going to decrease the size of it just a little bit and put it into the scene. Again, I'm on this blank layer right here. And I'm going to stamp once and then come over here and stamp a second time. And now we have 3 brush strokes, technically, that is creating this individual element itself. Let's look at the layer stack. It's here. It's above our black layer that we just created. So I'm going to turn that on. And now Oniric only sees the brush strokes that we created. If we turn on the original element that it created, it's not going to pick up any of that information. So I'm going to go ahead and click generate. It's going to take us back into Oniric with these new brush strokes that we just created in Photoshop using my custom brushes. So once we're in the dialog, again, we're in the diffuse option like we just did on the model itself. And as you can see, if I turn on X-ray, it sees the entire brush stroke because we painted with pure white. If we would have sampled the blue from her hair and shifted that light blue more toward the upper left of the color picker, then it would have seen a little bit of it, but it would not have taken this full shape because it wasn't pure white. So keep that in mind as you use the brushes. You do have some options of using the existing colors within the scene, but I recommend you start with pure white as you use the brushes themselves. So I'm going to turn off X-ray. Again, we can play with these different sliders. I highly recommend, if you get a copy of Oniric, to play around with light dispersion, exposure, all that kind of stuff, because it's truly remarkable in what it can do. But for purposes of video, I'm going to click Colorize here to give it a color. It's going to start with a hue of 0, which is red in the scene. I'm going to go ahead and click the color blue, like right there. The number is not important right now, but it will be in just a few minutes when we start using the light streak brushes. So I think that looks pretty good. Everything's fine. I'm going to go ahead and hit save. Now it's actually going to take place. It's going to render all of this and take us back to our document, depending upon the speed of your computer and depending upon how long you've been using your computer. If you've been using Photoshop all day and watching YouTube and other things, your CPU, your cache may be a little full. It may make the computer lag just a little bit more. If that happens, I highly recommend save everything that you've been working on, restart your computer, and everything will be as right as rain. So now we have those two outputs now here. The first one is the base glow that we put on top of the model, and then the second one is this element here. But I want to pay attention to these two layers. These are still active. So when Oniric produces its effects, the thumbnail looks like it's a pure black layer with the painted brushstroke, but it's actually been set to a blending mode of screen, which tells Photoshop to ignore the color black. That's why we see these elements painted into the scene. This technically means that this layer here that we painted the brushstrokes on is still visible. So I want to turn that off in this case. And when we get to the light streak brushes, I'll explain a little bit more about that. So if I turn off the black layer as well, we can now see the background element is into the scene, and we just need to take this top layer here and move it in the layer stack so it is below the extracted layer of the model. And now it's behind her. And with that glow turned on, this first base glow turned on, hopefully she will begin to blend with the background elements that we paint into the scene. When you use these brushes, if you don't do the first pass on the model, it can feel weird because the model looks normal, quote unquote, and then you have this glowing element in the background. So something to help you with the realism is to make sure you do that first pass on the model. Now, there's technically a couple of errors in this scene, especially by taking this element from Oniric and put it in the layer stack below the model. And we need to overcome that. And so let's go ahead and do that right now before we move on to the light streaks. When I zoom in, when this is behind her, I'm going to hit B for brush and go to a normal soft round brush here just for a second, which is general brushes. So when we look at this edge right through here, we can see some of the extraction of the layer mask itself. That's the first thing we have to clean up. But second, from a compositing perspective, to give this a true sense of realism, if we were on set and there was this cool triangular with 3 spikes neon sign behind her glowing with light, beautiful blue light, it would cause something called a bloom, where the light, if it's behind her, it would travel around. It's called a bloom, where the color and the light comes around. It happens in normal daylight. If you take a photo and you're outside, there is color that is wrapping around the subject if the sun is behind them. When you're doing composites, that's a little trick to make it, give it one more level of realism. You want to create a little bit of that bloom wrapping around the subject, depending upon the power of the light, the position of the light, and so forth. So in this case, the first thing that I would need to do is to come to the layer that we extracted and make sure I'm on the layer mask itself, hit B for brush, and then I'm going to paint black onto this layer mask using my Wacom Intuos Pro pen because I want pressure sensitivity. And I'm going to be painting at 100% flow and opacity. I'm going to get rid of all those rough edges through there so that the pure core elements, the pure perimeter of that hard edge of that brush that we use is visible in the scene. Now, the next thing that I want to do is I want to add a fake bloom. So my recommendation, my typical practice is to come to the layer that is the extracted layer of the model. While that's selected, I'm going to make a new blank layer that is above the model. Then I'm going to sample the existing color. I'm already on my brush. If I hold Alt or Option, it will defer to the eyedropper tool. I can get that color of blue. That's the glow from the scene. And then I'm going to change the flow of my brush. And this is just a tangent. I talk about this in a lot of the tutorials on the channel. Whenever I'm using a brush, I leave the opacity set to 100% always. I never reduce it. I change the flow of the brush. I want 100% of the paint, but I want to control how much of it is put down based upon the flow. So I'm going to change the flow of my brush to 5% by holding Shift, 0, and 5, holding Shift and then hitting 0 and 5 at the same time. Now I'm going to just start painting just a little bit of that blue glow right over the edge. Now you'll notice that the blue is taking place and we're seeing it on her dark hair, and that looks pretty good, but I also covered up the core element of the brush that we stamped into the background. So while this layer is active, I'm going to hit the letter E for eraser. I'm going to make sure that the eraser's flow and opacity are set to 100%, and then I'm simply going to erase it away from the background, coming right up to the edge of her hair. I want it off that element because I don't want blue over the white core element. I just wanted it to bloom over her hair. Now, this was a quick version of this, but I highly recommend you experiment a little bit, and it's pretty much, there's a couple of the ways you can do this, but they're pretty much all the same thing. You're going to paint either white or blue or whatever colors your background elements are to create the bloom, and you want it on top of your subject. Experiment with changing this blank layers blending mode from normal to screen, color dodge, even soft light. You'll get varying results. Again, it's depending upon the image, the colors in the scene, the actual lighting pattern of the photography, and so forth. But ultimately, it revolves around whatever solution you choose, it revolves around creating a blank layer above the subject and simply just using your mouse or a Wacom pen and painting the colors into the scene. And it can be as simple as that. If I hit Controller Command and the number 0, I will zoom all the way back out. And as we can see just from this view up here, if we focus up in this area, this is the after and before. We can see it visibly right now. If we zoom in just a little bit more and I turn it on and off, we're just creating a faux bloom of color, of light that looks like it's wrapping around from behind to be above the model's hair in front of the scene. So I'm gonna hit Controller Command 0 to zoom all the way back out. That's how you solve that issue. Now let's move on to the third phase of Oniric and this process of creating this artwork, which is to use the light streak brushes themselves. So I'm going to turn off this bloom layer for now, and I will turn it back on at the end. And the reason why is because we did use paint on this layer. It's entirely possible that Oniric may pick it up just depending upon where it is in the layer stack. Right now, if I left it on, we're going to be safe because it's below this black layer. The whole reason why this black layer exists is to hide all of the existing luminosity information in the image so that Oniric is forced to see the brushes themselves or whatever else you paint into the scene. So I'm going to turn on that black layer just one time so we can see everything that it sees. This was our original layer that had the brush that we did for the background. We no longer need this, so I'm going to go ahead and delete it. Now I'm going to make a new blank layer. I'm going to turn off the black one just so you can see the model. When I use the light streak brushes, I work in zones, and let's establish where I want the light streaks in this scene. So first and foremost, I'm going to put one on her either side of her hips, either arm, on her forearm, and then at the top of her head. So when I work in a zone, I don't want to just take my light streak brush. Let's go grab one real quick, and let's grab that one. That one looks good. I don't want to stamp this one blank layer with this one light streak brush 5 times in those areas that I just indicated where I want the light streaks, and then just run this blank layer through Oniric and be done with it. I work in zones because I'm trying to pay respect to the existing colors in this scene. So we talked about the photography. There are 2 lights on either side of the model with the same magenta gel. But when the light comes in and hits her bare skin, it is one tone of magenta. But when it came in and hit her leather skirt, it almost looks like it's purple. It's the same light, the same gel material, but the quality, the hue of the light, the tone of it, the colors, are just a little bit different. And I want to try to do the same thing with these light streak brushes. The reason why is an artist design choice, because if the viewer is going to look at this image and see 5 different light streaks across the scene, and they see the same color being used. If I were to take this blank layer, stamp it 5 times with a light streak brush or varying light streak brushes, run it through Oniric, colorize, and use one color, then it's that same color across the scene. The viewer is going to become desensitized to that color very quickly. So they'll look at the picture and be like, oh, wow, that's cool, that's great. But if you use other colors within that same color family of magenta, it's inviting the viewer to stay with the image just a little bit longer, to be able to see some more in it. And it's just one subtle little step that you can take that will help the audience to want to stay with your image, and you keep that audience retention. So with this light streak brush selected, I think this one looks fine enough. So we're on our blank layer here. Let's reset the foreground color to black and white. So hitting the letter D and then hitting the letter X. I'm making sure that I'm going to be painting with all, you know what, I'm on the eraser tool. So let's hit B for brush. And let's come back up and pick a light streak brush. Because now I'll have to remember to change my brush's head for the eraser tool back to a normal one and not a light streak. So we've picked a light streak brush. I'm going to go ahead and rotate the brush holding shift and the left arrow key and rotate it until it curves to fit her overall hip. And then painting with 100%, my flow is set to 5%. So I'm going to hit shift and 0 to change my flow to 100%. I'm going to stamp the layer once with that white particle effect there. And then I'm going to rotate the brush's head again, just so that the flow of it kind of fits her a little bit more, and then stamp the scene right there. This is one pass, one zone into the image. So now I'm going to turn on the black layer and then hit generate. Remember, Oniric is going to ignore any other elements that it's created, so it should only see the layer of the brush strokes that we just did. Now we're going to switch from diffuse as an option in Oniric to the light streaks themselves. Once it's into the dialog, we'll see that immediately Oniric sees some of the light data in the scene based upon the threshold of 0.25. Let's hit X-ray just to see what it sees. Let's go ahead and increase the threshold all the way up to a full stop, which is 1. And then now it sees all of the dots, or as many of them that it can, based upon the size of the brush when we painted it and so forth. Now the light streaks are very prominent. They're in the scene. It looks great. I'm going to change the rotation. So right now it's on a horizontal plane or set to 0. I'm going to take it to a positive 90. So we'll go up and down and kind of follow that overall flow. And if you do buy my brushes, I do recommend, once you're inside of Oniric, to work with the experiment with the rotation of the light streaks, because the shapes of the brush heads will have varying results to the light streaks based upon the rotation that you set here in Oniric right here with the slider. So again, you can play around with threshold and exposures and all these different things, but I'm going to go ahead and hit Colorize. And now the number that we choose is going to be important. So we know that the magenta gel coming onto the black leather skirt is a little bit more purple. So I'm going to select a color here that's just a tad more purple than the magentas. So that looks a little too purple. I'm going to slide it over just a little bit more. We're at a number of 273. That looks better. I like that. So let's remember this number 273. That looks good. I'm going to go ahead and hit save. It'll take a moment or two for Oniric to take place. When we get back into the program and back into Photoshop, I'm going to make a new blank layer, and I'm going to paint new light streaks onto the scene on her arms. We'll come back into Oniric, and when we colorize it, instead of choosing 273, let's choose like 283. It's still in that same magenta color family, but it's a subtle shift of it that pays respect to the existing colors within the scene and its subtle variations of the colors, and it invites the audience to stay a little bit longer. Now let's zoom in just a little bit here. So we have our top elements on the layer stack of what Oniric output as its element, but the original layer where we painted the brush strokes it's still on, so we can see the actual little glittery particle pattern of the brush. If I turn it off, it will be gone. And it's not, oh, I'm sorry, I turned off the wrong layer. I was like, what? I'm gonna have to go back and re-record this because that's stupid. All right, so this top layer, let's that one's off, that one's fine. So this top layer is the one that we just created the brush strokes with. And so again, sometimes you just, anyway, so if we turn this off, the little particle pattern is gone now. But if you want that existing particle pattern to still be there, you can just leave the layer on as is. Just remember, as you start making new blank layers in the layer stack above that black layer, if you leave this one on, Oniric will pick it up and rerun a glow on top of it. Let's also show you just another quick tip. With this layer active, if you don't want the brush head to be the exact shape, if you don't want it to stay that way, you can always give it a blur of its own in Photoshop. So with the layer active, I'm going to come up to filter, down to blur, and then come to motion blur. And this is similar to what you would see in Oniric. So right now we're at a positive 90-degree angle, so it's going to go up and down. The distance is the key. So I'm going to return the distance back to 1. And now that we can see the little particles, as I begin to move this up, the particles start to blur out in a motion of up and down based upon this angle that we chose. So this is a way to kind of blur those out, but still keep them there if you want just a little bit of that hint of that white core within the light streak. Again, you can just leave it with no blur. You can set it to 1. You can increase it where it's almost practically gone. It's up to you. Experiment with what your needs are for your image itself. I'm going to hit cancel. And now let's hit Control and the minus key, or Command and the minus key, to zoom out just a little bit. And let's make a new blank layer. I'm going to turn off this one and then come up to the brushes and pick a different brush set. Let's grab this one. That one looks fine. And let's go ahead and decrease the size of this one, and we'll paint it right here. And then I'm going to rotate the brush's head by holding Shift and the right arrow key. And then let's make the brush a little bit bigger this time. And I'm now not holding Shift, I'm just hitting the left arrow key to rotate it just in smaller degree increments. And I'm going to stamp the scene like that. Now I'm going to turn on that black layer. Oniric elements are active, but they won't be picked up by the program. And we turned off this layer, which is that particle pattern down on her hips themselves. So now let's go ahead and hit generate and go to Oniric. And we'll see that the brushes themselves, this is why, I mean, not to be biased, but I like these brushes that I've created because the different shaped heads The one we just used was that little fine particles. These have very significant shapes to them at varying levels of pressure of paint that's put into the scene. So let's go into streaks, and as we can see already, Oniric will see some of the effect, but it's not picking up everything, and the shapes are drastically different than the one we just used. So I'm going to change the rotation to be that positive 90, so they go up and down. And again, it's worth noting that ultimately the shapes of the light streaks can be vastly different based upon the rotation here in Oniric. So since they're going up and down, I think everything looks great. We're going to hit Colorize. What was the number? Was it 273? Is that right? It wasn't 263. I think it's 273. Yeah, it's too purple. So 283. Let's go to 283 was what I think I said that we should do. And again, that's 10 points away from the previous one that we did. So it's still in that magenta family, but it's a subtle variation to it. We can increase the exposure a little bit. We can increase the threshold here just so that Oniric will see a little bit more of all of this and pick up some more of that brush head a little bit. There we go. We got some significant looks there. I'm going to go ahead and hit save. But you can experiment with the other sliders. The dispersion one is really cool. The light streaks detail option in Oniric is really cool as well. I highly recommend it. I love Oniric. It's such a powerful plugin. I love the work. I love what it can do, and it has drastically changed my artwork forever. I cannot recommend it enough to folks. So once this is done, now we have the output. I'm going to turn off that black layer again. And this is an option again where we can see the original brush head and stamp because of this layer that's active. If we turn it off, we get rid of some of that weird pattern. And arguably, I mean, for me, like, I would go ahead and delete it because the shapes of the brushes, it looks like a really bad Rorschach test, or like she's got some kind of plague, like sci-fi, like this is like a Star Trek plague that's like eating her skin or something. So go ahead and get rid of it if you want to, or do the motion blur onto it. You can also do a Gaussian blur, which is a general blur outward from whatever shape that you are running the blur on. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it off. And ultimately, let's hit Controller Command 0 and zoom all the way back out. Let's turn on that little glitter particle pattern at the bottom. This is how you use these custom brushes, and this is how I went about it. I just simply used blank layers, changing my foreground color to white, finding the different shapes and stamping them into the scene. When I did the one on her forearm, I picked one that had, you know, little circles and so forth, and I made that one, I colorized that one a blue. I colorized this one a different version of blue, just a few points different. And then I added some more background elements into the scene, the big circles and so forth. I added more little lens flares around her and so forth, all using my custom brushes, doing the same process. Blank layer, stamping the brush with pure white paint at 100% opacity and flow, using that black layer, turning it on, going into Oniric, playing with the controls in Oniric, colorizing it, outputting it, and then when I was ready to make this video, I just simply collapsed all of them down into 2 layers so you could see it and make it a little bit easier, so you wouldn't see like 15 different Oniric elements and think, oh my gosh, this is crazy. So the sky's the limit for creativity, and ultimately that's the process I would go through. I would start in those 3 stages, first with the model, then the background elements, and then the light streaks on top. Make sure to add the realistic blooms into the scene, and you'll be able to create this artwork that you see and go beyond that. So that's pretty much the video. Let's go ahead and have some final thoughts and finish up for today. So the joy and the fun that I have found with these custom brushes is because of all the varying shapes and so forth, there's a lot of room for experimentation in the artwork and a lot of ways to be able to work with it. These brushes I made like a year or so ago because I made them to start using in Cyberpunk work for image competitions. I wanted to be able to add my own light streaks and neon glows to background cities and so forth for the artwork I was going to be creating. And when Oniric came along and its unique algorithm to make those glows and those light streaks and so forth, I started using my brushes with it, and I was just so excited because they worked so well with it. But again, you don't have to have Oniric to use the brushes themselves. You can use Photoshop to create the glows and so forth. There are videos on this channel that will explain all of that, but I strongly recommend that you invest into Oniric. It is truly remarkable. I have never seen another plugin that can create these effects. And the creator, Mario Olvera, he's a brilliant, amazing artist. I've always loved his work. He's a great human being, and Oniric is wonderful. I highly recommend that you check it out. Again, if you're interested in picking up the brushes, go to realityreimagined.com. There's a link in the description below to pick up the brushes. There's 2 packs, the glow auras and the light streaks, or the combo pack, which is the 3rd icon, where you can get all the brushes for a little bit cheaper than buying them individually. And then you can go to compositenation.com. Again, there's a link in the description below to pick up your copy of Oniric. Get the brushes, experiment with them, experiment through the process of different genres of photography, whether you use them in special effects or actual, you know, gel glamour or whatever you want to photograph. Let me know how it goes. You can put in the comments of this video. You can always send me a message through the website itself. I love seeing what people have been using my brushes with. They've sent messages to me, which is wonderful, saying, hey, thanks for the brushes. Here's what I created with it. And I think it's so cool because I get to see people utilizing something that I created to help them create artwork. And that means an absolute lot to me. So thank you again for considering these brushes. So I want to finish up on a couple of thoughts very briefly about George Floyd and about the world and the state of our world. And I have a lot of opinions about it. So does everybody across planet Earth. But I simply want to say this to you all on this platform right now. There are so many things going on in our human society that is causing destruction, is causing pain. And it's not just the issues of equality. It's not just the issues of politics. It's the environment and so many other things that are happening. And now, more than ever, humanity needs artists. It needs a lot of other support. It needs a lot of other folks in positions of authority and power and intellectuality and wisdom and knowledge to step in. But it also needs artists, because in every great strife in humanity, artists have been the ones writing poems and plays and producing artwork and creating sculptures and just using their creativity to be yet another light to show humanity that there is a better way forward. So if you're an artist, which again, I'm assuming you are because you follow my work or follow this channel, use your artwork now, because your artwork will not only help you to find your way forward, it can help other people. And that is a tremendous gift that we can give to humanity, and it is absolutely essential that we do. So don't let these dark times bring you down as an artist. Don't let it put a lid on your creativity. Use your creativity to be a light, to show others a better way forward, and we will all be better for it. Thank you for watching this tutorial. Again, if you like the content of the tutorial, please give the video a like and consider subscribing. The new content comes out each week. In photography and Photoshop education, I am actually set this weekend to go photograph for 9 total hours in the studio. I'll be returning to the photography studio since the outbreak of COVID, and I'm very excited. I'm going to have new content coming to this channel that is on site in the studio, explaining the lights and the gears that the gear that I use, the lighting equipment I use, the lighting patterns, and talking through a lot of photography as well as Photoshop education. So hit that subscribe button, hit the bell icon so you'll be notified of that new content when we return to YouTube. Thank you so much for your support. It means the absolute world to me. And until next time, I will see you out there in the world of Photoshop.